everyone. Thank you for being with us here today. This is the Ananke panel on Women Translating Women by Zubaan books. I'm so excited to be here today and to be in conversation with Professor Rita Kothari and Krupa. I'm Chandana. I'm a graduate student at Columbia University in the Department of Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies, and I will be a moderator for this panel. So this panel has come together based on two books, both published by this really wonderful project called Women Translating Women, which is by Zubaan Books and the Ashoka Center for Translation. We'll speak about these books a little later, but before that, I want to introduce our two panelists for today. Professor Rita Kothari is a professor of English and co-director of the Ashoka Center for Translation at Ashoka University. She's a multilingual scholar and translator whose work spans across different disciplines such as literature, cultural studies, anthropology, sociology, and history. Her questions emerge from the observations of regions and communities in the western part of the Indian subcontinent, which is Gujarat, Kutch, and Sindh. She has translated extensively from Gujarati and Sindhi into English, and occasionally vice versa. Her translations, as well as her edited volumes, as well as her teaching, have made significant contributions to the field of language politics, translation, and just the academy. Krupa lives and writes in Chennai. She is the author of two novels, Burns Boy and What We Know About Her, which was published in 2021. Her debut, Rivers Remember 2019, is a creative nonfiction inquiry into the Chennai floods of 2015. She's also a translator of one of the books from Tamil that we're reading today. Thank you both and welcome. I'm so excited for this conversation. So just to go over the two books that we are reading today. One is Ittihad, A Life Together by Guli Sadarangani. If I am pronouncing that wrongly, Professor Kothari will correct me. Translated by Rita Kothari. And the second is Unmoored by Ramachandran Usha, which is translated from the Tamil into English by Krupa. So let's start with how both of you came to these books. What drew you to these writers, these authors, the stories that they're telling us, and the kind of interventions they might be making in what women's literature really is understood as.
I think I'll let Rita start first. Yeah.
Sure. We just decided. Chandana, thank you so much for introducing us and also for setting that tone. And maybe this is an auspicious occasion for you to drop the professor and Kothari business. And, let's get baptized today. And you should call me Rita. Many years ago, more than I remember, I must have come across some encyclopedic entry about Ittihad in some note on Sindhi literature, and it only had this one sentence saying, Guli Sadarangani wrote the first novel. She was the first woman writer who wrote the novel called Ittihad, which became controversial, and it is about a Hindu-Muslim romance. And that is it. I did not come across a word more than this in the subsequent years. But that particular line, it stayed with me. And I always sort of told myself, someday I should find out where is this novel? What is it about? And it took many years. And as you know, I went on to do a lot of work, right? On historical work on Sindh, the rehabilitation, refugee issues of the Sindhi community when they came to India. Also, their absorption into Hindu majoritarianism, and what are some of the prices they paid as a part of their assimilationist politics as post-partition sort of refugees and this and that. I translated short stories and yevo, but I had not read Ittihad. And then, once this women, we conceptualized this Women Translating Women program. I thought this is the time to do it. And because you must also remember that no mainstream publisher is going to be interested in a woman they haven't heard of, in a language they haven't heard of or had much to do with. And I thought, well, this is an opportunity for me, and it just fits in so well into the project. And that I managed to track down the only existing copy in the country in the region of Adipur in Kutch, where someone called Dada Bijani, who's now in his late 80s, he was the only person who had two copies, and one I almost stole from him. And this is it. So I read the story and I felt that it had some strengths, but it also has a kind of a slightly incipient sort of a nature to the writing, almost like it is early writing. It's the beginning of somebody who's still working out the craft. But I thought in terms of the politics of Sindh at that time, relations between Hindus, Muslims, a certain kind of implicitness about caste in those conversations, all of that I thought was really interesting. And so I went ahead and translated it. So I think, Chandana, this is really a pioneering novel, and no history of women's writing in India, even the one by Susi Tharu and K. Lalita, the two volumes, they do not mention her. Nobody mentions her. And therefore, there were multiple reasons why this became interventionist, right?
Yeah. Krupa?
Yeah. But I also wanted to add that, I read and I also had an event with Rita about Ittefaq for this bookshop, Mehra bookshop in Kochi. And I just wanted to say that it's both the translation and the book, I found them to be, it was like reading a friend's book. I don't know, how could she have been my friend, right? I guess it's because Rita was translating it. But it's like somebody who could have those kind of conversations with today, sort of a very Nehruvian India idea of India, that sort of a thing. So I just wanted to say that. With me, actually, how I came to translation was I first edited a bunch of poems for First Post. They had a poetry in translation month some years ago, and that was really my first introduction to. I curated a list of poetry from across the country, Dalit writers who were writing in their mother tongues, and that was being translated. And then I also sort of translated some non-fiction by Stalin Rajangam, the Tamil writer, and so I hadn't actually translated fiction, even though I was trying to make it as a fiction writer at that time and all those years. And then it was not until this women translating women project that I did it. It's really funny because this auntie who lived in my building when I was a kid and whose daughter I was friends with moved away, and then I heard that she'd written a novel and that it had won a prize in Tamil, and that's all I knew about this and this book. And I wanted to trace the book and find out and see what this book was really about. And I was kind of blown away by the themes that she had spoken about. In fact, she had moved away from my building and then moved into the Gulf. And this was a book that she says the stories that she collected almost sort of from there and then wove into her fiction. A lot of the events in the book are actually milder versions of events that have happened to women who go to Gulf and have told her. And for me, another really thrilling part of translating this book was some parts of it was actually set in the streets I grew up in. And because she is from the same neighborhood, I was actually writing about the plays I grew up romanticizing. It's sort of like this, and the plays I would end up writing about in my flood book as well. My first book, Rivers Remember, which was gutted. Basically, the entire place was flooded, and this was sort of set in the time from before the flood. And so translating that was also really interesting for me. But most of all, as a writer of fiction, for instance, I would never have written a woman like, or any of these women, actually, these protagonists like this. But what I found really interesting about the women was that they were so secure in their faith. These were all women of faith, and in that security of their faith, they were able to find camaraderie. They were able to find fellowship with other women of faith, and this is something that's sort of this is what has been lost in the new India. I feel this idea that we can come together in this way as well. Hindu women, Muslim women, but also basically just women who have, who believe in certain things, and that can sort of bring them together. For me, that was really the takeaway from the book, and I felt like it was a worthwhile, endeavor to sort of try and bring this into English.
Yeah, I noticed that too, especially comparing these two books, which is one is so starkly Nehruvian secularist, saying we must get rid of religion and become Indian, almost in the way Shah Rukh Khan says it in Chapte. And on the other end, it is this kind of commitment to thinking about faith. Because even in the end, she gives away the property to the Jamaat. She doesn't just turn it into a different kind of NGO. Which is a very interesting way of reading these two texts together. I also wanted to go back to a slip of tongue, Krupa, which was women writing women and women translating women, which brings me to my next question, which is, what do you think that process is different like? Whether it is your authors writing these women, or it is you as translators translating these women who are writing these women. What to me instinctively it's things you pay attention to. It's things that are very subtly might be ignored by anybody else, but both of you have really made sure that you either leave something untranslated so that somebody pays attention to it, or like really underline something else. Food becomes very important in both of these texts. And Rita, I don't think the caste stuff is subtle. I think it's very much in terms of the domestic out there. So how do you think this kind of women translating women and women writing women really pays attention to certain things?
Krupa, go ahead. You do both.
Yeah. So when I first heard the question, I was going to say it's sort of like reprimanding your own child versus you're the aunt, and so it's sort of. I think you're as a writer, you're sort of a little more generous when you're translating. This is what I feel too, the characters. But you're also a little bit like, I would have done this differently. If this were my baby, it would be treated. This is what this baby is supposed. But then when you sit down to write your own fiction as well, there are so many constraints in terms of, you have a vision of a particular book when you're writing a woman. You have a particular idea of what this book is supposed to be like, but it's sort of like having a dream. There's only so much control you have over the final produced book. You were sort of trying to say all of these things are what I want. The book that is in your subconscious never really translates into the book that is in reality, the book that you produce. But I feel like with translation, especially when you're translating a woman's book, I feel like for me, I'm able to sort of keep that, skip over that part of the disappointment of never being able to translate what is in my subconscious, because there's already a finished product, and my aim is to just sort of, follow the script. Even then, of course, you're never 100% satisfied. You're always feeling like, oh, I wish I'd done this differently. I would totally do it differently now. All that happens. It's very hard for anybody to revisit their book or think about what they would have done. But I feel like it's sort of, in my opinion, I found while I was translating, I was able to sort of do the surrender much easily, because I know that this is a woman from somebody else. This is somebody else's idea, and I know I'm only here to observe, and I'm only here to sort of make that be a medium sort of for it to flow through. So that consciousness actually helps. And I think in terms of sheer like pleasure, I would say, it's torture to be writing the original fiction, I would think. And for me, it's sort of like a pleasure, like a sort of an experience that I can really soak in when I'm doing the translation. Also because I'm reading in Tamil, which is also lovely for me to sort of so even the characters' values, I feel, change when they are speaking, whether they are between the Tamil text and the English text. So if my character originally is speaking English in my subconscious and I'm writing that as fiction, versus that character was written in Tamil, and that character's subconscious is operating in the Tamil universe, within the Tamil ethos. So trying to bring that, what that character is observing, what they're eating, what their ideas are about caste and religion, all of that is also really sort of pleasurable and interesting to me. Sort of, it's an education for sure.
Thank you. Rita?
I'm struggling somewhat with this distinction between writing and translating. And we know it's an old sort of chestnut, but theoretically, even experientially, I struggle with thinking about this. I could be glib and say, Chandana, it's a binary, it's nonsense. There is no distinction between translating and writing. Or I could say, yeah, well, there is of one kind, but there isn't of another kind. But the point is that we don't know till we know, till you're involved in, for instance, Krupa is very squarely involved in both. Someone like me, I'm involved in the act of writing. It's not creative writing, but on the other hand, even my academic writing, is sort of quite almost like narrative nonfiction quite often. And I've, it was quite interesting that Krupa mentioned reprimanding one's own baby in a way that you don't do it to someone else's baby. I'm not sure the babies like that very much when they hear it, but it's interesting. Gulli Sadarangani actually mentions in her preface, she had translated men. She had translated Nehru and she translated Tagore. And so I don't know whether it has something to do with the fact that she was translating male writers, but she says that, how she felt like a nanny when she was doing it for somebody else. And so she also, Krupa, she's also using the metaphor of, childbirth and child rearing and all of that. And she says that, it is like a pariah child, and she's using pariah as it. But it's interesting, the word pariah has also these other meanings in our Indian languages. So she says, but it's the creative thing that, the zing I got from doing my own novel. It's really quite remarkable. And I kind of stopped at that time and I thought, well, I'm not sure I like this childbirth and all that too much. But I sort of thought that, is it also the fact that she was translating Nehru, for Pete's sake? She's translating, Tagore. These are like huge men. And so whether there was a certain other, because I mean, the thing about translation is that every once in a while you become a creator. You translate and then intermittently you think, there we go. Like, something has happened here. It is the joy of creating. It is not, quote unquote, just translating, right? And the thing is, the creative writer also has to kind of do the riyaz, which is almost like craft, so it can seem someday like grunt work, like editing, crafting, rewriting, and so forth. So are the two different? I think the two are different in where they begin, and somewhere along the way, they also sometimes intersect, right? So I don't want to make too much of that segregation, but Women Translating Women as a project, as a title, we came up with it at the center because we were approached to translate Susham Bedi's work, right? And I was thinking at that time that, well, there are so many women who do not get to be heard. So the unheardness and their being women, they are both like of a piece. And then I thought, well, I've always believed that there are more women translators in the world than men. And I say this because even if we don't actually have all the empirical facts with us, but from whatever one has read of other scholars in the world talking about women, you know that all the little magazines, small translations, unpaid translations, or even like translating books, which all over the world, it seems like women have done that a lot. Perhaps if we were to sit down and count the numbers, we would find more women than men. I'm also thinking, and I'm using the word women here very broadly, okay? I don't want to be very reductive about men, women. I'm also thinking, to me, actually, and that is a more important part, that women also negotiate and navigate far more in certain societies. And so we navigate between, in the worlds of domestic, in the worlds of many multiple worlds. And the idea of like sometimes dealing with male anger, dealing with male competition, dealing with even the passive aggressive nature of other women, all that is, we encounter that much more, right? I mean, I do believe that many women are so much kinder to men and cut so much slack for them than they do, for peers like us. So the idea of navigating, negotiating, and to me, the toughness of that job is the toughness of a translator's job. And so I also, in that sense, when I say women translating women, I'm also, Chandana, I'm bringing forth, at least in my head or in the conception of the project, where I was quite sort of centrally involved, was also all these histories of minoritization, which sometimes translation manages to address, and translation itself is minoritized, right? So these various historical loops and these various multiple contexts of production and these multiple modes of navigation, all of that I see in a very I see it in a gendered way. That being said, I don't want to be awfully, what shall I say, reductive about this. And I don't want to kind of legislate some law about only women can translate women and all of that. I think if we think of what might be gendered modes of writing, navigating, interpreting, decoding, then I think let's just talk of the title of a book that I'm working on, in collaboration with Laura Bruick and Christy Merrill, which is called Sex, Text, and Translation. What might be these acts of paying close attention, listening, sort of seeing. I remember an occasion, when, for instance, Laura and I were looking at a translation she's doing, Anita Bharti's memoir, a Dalit memoir. And there is somebody that Anita Bharti talks about, where somebody, a Buddhist, Ambedkarite, some uncle type person who would come to their home and who would who had roving hands, and he would have touched his little child. And somewhere along the way in the writing said, वो बाद में भी आता था. Earlier it said वो आते थे, हमारे घर बैठते थे. And then at some point, very imperceptibly, she says, हाँ वो आता था. And I said to Laura, I said, wait a minute, did you see what just happened? That shift from aate the to aata tha is could be conscious, could be not, could be an anger that did not find a place, but that did, in some sense, find a place even in the grammatical usage. Now, ये बारीकी वाला काम है ना? This is like very fine work. It's a fine reading, Chandana. And this reading, sometimes women do because they pay more attention to syllabic shifts, to grammatical usages, to half trailing sentences. Not all women, but many do. And I think, in some sense, conceptually and theoretically, it is this particular methodology of translation that I'm actually foregrounding in a lot of my work, and I do it, and I also want to see what this is about, right? And so, without wanting to kind of legislate that only X should translate X and Y should translate Y, I don't want to do that, largely because I don't want to close off possibilities. I mean, in some sense, to me, that position is also a position of, I understand there are forms of appropriation. I understand that there are forms of hijacking, and we know that they happen all the time. So, yes, granted. But I also do believe that it's sort of analogous with being sort of very awfully indigenous and nativistic. You close off possibilities by doing that. But does that mean you don't recognize the grounds upon which we stand? I believe very firmly we must always remember the ground upon which we stand, except that we needn't make that ground into some kind of garbhagriha. We needn't make that ground into some kind of a temple space and holy and sacrosanct and so forth. So I think translation to me is also about being where you are, and it is also about opening up many other spaces and sort of subverting the epistemological order of things. And I think it is women translating women has been one such effort to do it. So, for instance, when in Ittihad, Hamid is talking to his parents and he says to his mother, he says, I care Khudaji Bandi. Like she's asking, whom are you in love? What is. And he says, I hai koi, matlab khuda, I care Khudaji Bandi. And the mother says, Asa sabu Khudaja Banda ayu. Like we are all Khuda ke bande, but tell me more. And he's not using the word Hindu, he's postponing it, he's differing it somewhat. And then can't remember how he actually says, she says, Asa sabu khuda ja banda ayu, par kuch ta budai, zaat paat kuch ta cho. He's right. She's saying zaat paat. Now, when she says zaat paat, does she actually mean tell me which caste it is? Or does she say tell me more? You know, the idea that tell me what species it is, tell me more, right? And to me, what is more interesting is not so much that it's worded that way, because I do believe it is always worded that way. But it is also the fact that he says, "Hane tu zaat paat mein bhi manindi hai chal." Matlab, he's saying to his mother, "Ab tum zaat paat ke bhi sawal karogi." Why is he saying this in a way that this question wouldn't have been asked of Asha's mother? It is asked of Hamid's mother because Hamid's family is a Sufi family of Sindh. And this idea that Sufis of Sindh are above this, right? And they are liberal and they are above, it is a very big belief. And even today, it is a very big belief, even in all the nationalist Sindhis who I interact with a lot, and they have believed that Sufism is not only a religio-cultural thing, it's a political thing. And it is also about rising above, so on and so forth, which are now Dalit Tehriki organizations have begun to push back and question and so on. So to me, it was a very important moment that the mother says, "Ha kuch ta zaat paat budai," and Hamid is like, "Are you going to be asking me those questions?" and so on. So what I think I don't know whether Gully was thinking deeply about this,
Mhm.
but I do believe that to me, it also reveals something very contemporary about Sufi ideology, which has been, all the films we saw and Ranbir and what have you, and Nizamuddin and rock star, and all that has made our notion of Sufism so stupid, I cannot tell you, so flaky. It is a very, very interesting political, cultural ideology that has had stakes in real time politics in Pakistan, right? And so I felt that the book also has that in a way that I'm not able to unfold all of that for the audience. I can only do so much in translation. But I think these are also things that make actually a frontier region like Sindh very, very interesting, because what happens at the frontiers, what happens at the borders reveals most the anxieties of the core, of anxieties of the mainland India. And I think Sindh has a very important lesson to teach there. So, so my interest is also coming from many such contexts, and therefore it is not only about women's writing or about Gulli, or it is also about many, many other things that go on in that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I was also thinking when you were talking about Zaat Paat, about how very often in common parlance people say Mard Zaat. Uh, तो ऐसे ही होता है or like how is the species of man already like this, right?
Yeah, of course.
And that in many different languages, like in Kannada, something like that comes
Yeah,
up. It both foregrounds how jati or zat is the metric by which we speak in South Asia, but
yeah,
also that it can be more than just what is
yeah,
the particular subcaste that this person belongs to. And I think there's a lot of language work in both of your texts that do that, that kind of reveal that words we take for granted mean a lot more things.
yeah,
Or that words that we don't really know can be used in different ways. And sometimes it's also just language. Krupa, especially when I was reading your book, it was in the beginning where Arabic, Tamil, and English, and all of these languages become characters, that these characters are paying close attention to themselves and then making judgments and decisions based on what words they're using, what language they're using, how they're able to speak in those languages, what are they wielding at what point in time in this again border zone, quite literally an airport between two countries. And our conversation also like brought it back to me that as much as Anmod is steeped in faith, its big bad villain is a big bad villain of a certain kind in the Gulf, right? Like
Right.
it's an idea of Islam um, that is embodied in these nation states. And then you have our characters thinking about faith in a different way.
Right.
So, what do you guys think? How do languages become characters? How are languages themselves employed to signify things in these texts? But also, how then do you translate something like that, these relationships between languages, into a language like the English, where the expectation is that it is a standardized English? And obviously, we all know better than to accept that, but how does that work?
Right. It's very interesting that you brought this up because the book sort of begins like that, in which Amira is negotiating in a language that is sort of, so there is a hierarchy, and she's come from Chennai, and she is in the UAE, and she's scribbling her name down in Arabic. And the fact that she knows how to write her name in Arabic is revealed to us in the first sentence, and that in the second sentence. But before that, we find out that she's in a prison in the Gulf. And so you are getting all of this information, and then progressively you get more and more information about language. Like the officers are speaking in Hindustani. The officers were trying to get her out. They're speaking in a mix of Urdu and Hindi and English to her. And then when she comes back to Chennai, and then there's the Tirunelveli dialect that sort of comes in, and the Brahmin woman, the Hindu woman who's sort of, I'm guessing she's upper caste because she says she's a vegetarian, but she has married somebody who's not. That's all we kind of get from the text. Who notices the difference in the dialect and asks one of the other women, "Oh, where are you from? You're speaking slightly differently," and there is that hierarchy at every point of what is the norm and who's outside of this, what is the dominant language and who is operating outside of this. But because we are hearing from women, they're mostly throughout this text, and we're not really hearing from the men at all in this text. The way they're negotiating this hierarchy of languages is very different. It's sort of not, it is not, except for in the prison, for instance, where she's writing her name down in Arabic, or when she's with a policewoman in the airport, or when she's trying to talk to somebody on the phone, asking to meet her son, who's going to be left behind in the Gulf. So in all those times, you can hear the sharpness of the language almost in the kind of the authority that is employed, as opposed to the constant negotiation, the sort of friendly banter, and it's not curt, it's sort of like, they're just sort of a dance that sort of, they're trying to get to know each other. Everybody else is just in on this. But when you come to a space where you're clashing with a figure of authority, at that point, there's no negotiation happening in the language. It's just sort of like a transaction. Hey, this is all you're going to get. There's just going to be no more leeway. You leave the airport now. You will sort of be put in your seat. You will have to sort of sign this paper. So you can see the rigidity and then the negotiations that are happening between the women and the others that they encounter. Even the Hindu woman in this story, when she's talking to her own family, as opposed to when she's talking to these other two Muslim women, you can see the difference. So her access has been cut off to her own family, and she has more access to these two other women. And the amount of conversation she's able to have with her husband, with her in-laws, all of that is sort of clipped. You can't really hear, you can't really negotiate, you don't have the time. And you can that is something that I found really interesting. One is, of course, that this is a story we don't hear at all about women from Tamil Nadu who go to the Gulf in marriage, to work and all of that. But the other thing that, I sort of found really interesting was, that these women are sort of making some kinds of some kind of like a separate world, that we don't know what it's like to go to the Gulf and work. And that is actually the thing that binds all three of them together. Apart from the fact that they are women of faith and all of the other things, we don't know what it's like to be there as somebody who's second class, on top of being woman. You're brown, and then you're South Asian, and then you're a woman, and then you're going there in a place where you're not particularly equal anyway. And so I think that is something else that binds them all together, and those different sort of layers come through. And they also shows the possibilities of relating to another person. It doesn't have to be that you can only relate to people from your own social class. That's something else that the women should. They just don't have to be speaking the same language as you. They don't have to worship the same God as you. They don't even have to. There's something else that you can find, and that possibility is also, of course, it requires an extreme circumstance. Also, it's not as if they're all. It's not like in normal course of life they would have become buddies or, even lived with each other. But when push comes to shove, it's nice that you can have somebody else to, come in and take care of you. And this sort of inversion that I constantly encountered in this text of who's the savior and who's the villain and so that sort of I found very interesting. So the easiest thing actually for the author to have done in this text would have been to make the sheikh whom the young Muslim woman marries and goes to Dubai the really bad guy. Instead, she encounters a sort of tenderness from him, and instead she's sort of like treated like it's wrong. Obviously, he's 60 years old and this girl is in her 20s. And but instead she encounters for the first time something different in her life, and where she's sort of treated nice, and she begins to actually like this experience. And even the text, while showing us what this guy is doing is obviously wrong, like there is an underlying understanding that even before her wedding is fixed with this older guy, everybody in the family says, we don't do all that here. We don't send our girls away to do things like this. This is not what we do, is a baseline that they've already set. But after that, beyond that, there's a sort of, the irony or sort of how life really unfolds. It's not as if monsters are all the time monsters and bad guys are all the time bad guys. But so that is something that I found, the Hindu woman who comes back and finds her husband to have turned into sort of like the, so it also showed me that this writer has sort of, I don't know if it's deliberate or if this is who she is, but she had escaped so many trappings of stereotypes as she set this text about. So that's what, for me was, that is also the beauty of, finding I'm not very sure if such a text could have existed by itself in English or would have existed by itself in English, or anybody would have written it with this kind of a nuance, with this sort of intersection. And that is what makes this project so unique, right? You're able to bring into English something that the English consciousness cannot produce by itself in fiction. So when we were talking about women writing women, that is the other thing that this project is enabling, a different sort of consciousness, a different sort of vision of the world to be brought into the English world, which, we can also be very rigid when we're thinking in English about, like, our political views are so set, which is why, which is why I kind of also agree, even though I am a writer who writes in English fiction, I know people are constantly saying, I think the other day I saw somebody had put a review of, I think Chiki of Juggernaut had put a review of this new magazine of Vivek Shanbag's and said no English writer could have produced anything I saw in this magazine. As an English writer writing in fiction, it stung, but I know why that is said. I know why people say that Indian writing in English and those who are writing fiction in other languages, and that is being translated into English. I know that there is a difference. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I know, as a writer who does both, I know that such a distinction exists, and it's kind of stings to admit that this gulf exists, and well, good for me that I get to do both. So yeah.
I felt like Unmoored would not only, I would find it difficult to imagine something like Unmoored Krupa in Gujarati, right? I think the practices of labor by which these three women end up being where they are, that would be difficult. The role that Tamil plays in the interaction of the Hindu and the Muslim and the Christian and what have you is very different from what Gujarati does. That even like not only today, but even like literary history of Gujarat all along has been about writers, Hindu writers, not even though there might be a couple of Muslim writers, but they get subsumed, but it has basically not, it is unimaginable for me, given what the history of the state has been. So I think there are many things, that migration, that labor, what is the reason why you go to the Gulf as opposed to why you go to New Jersey and live there. So I mean, there is a lot here, which is, I find these things about regions very, that always sort of very interesting. For instance, Ittihad, the language of Sindhi, Chandana, not so much within the book, but look at the politics around the book. Gulir Sadarangani's son had not known what his mother had written. In some sense, because he wasn't reading in Sindhi, he doesn't speak Sindhi. And as you know, that many generations don't now. And so the fact that he is listening to his mother through another woman like me, right? So in the case of Sindhi, translation is not just a metaphoric idea. Very literally, you can only read or hear or know about something when it is sort of translated. But the coming back to your question, there are two languages in the novel. One is Guli's indoctrination at Shantiniketan, people she is, the good citizen that she is, the world citizen she wants to become. There is a certain slightly cut paste, what shall I say, uh, pedantic something which she has clearly taken from these men whom she was following, translated. I mean, she was also sort of idolizing Tagore and so forth. So there is that. Every once in a while, she is her own self.
Yeah.
And I pick it up and I'm thinking, I wish you would write more like this. So that particular interaction with Hamid and his parents, I thought something was interesting was happening there. Uh, and when Hamid's father or mother, they say, you will marry somebody who, people who don't even accept food from us, right? By which they were referring to themselves as Muslims. I think that shift between being Sindhi and to be Sindhi is to be Sufi. There is that. Then, but also being Muslims, people who are rejected by upper caste Hindus, and so on. Uh, I think when she's in that zone, she's quite interesting. But then every once in a while, she has this language she has inherited from the great masters. So I feel there are two languages at work in the novel. And but as I said, there is also a politics around the politics of Sindhi language around, which is that now it's a language that can only be known about or heard about in translation because Indian Sindhis are not reading Sindhi books at all, right? And they are not speaking the language. So there's a very different thing going on here. And I think, some other people who read Ittihad said to me that, Rita, it was quite lovely the way some of the important words you have retained. It felt like I came closer to Sindh through this novel. And one of the reasons, Chandana, I'm also doing it is also because very much like Adivasis, I feel my language is going. I want to remember the words. I want to repeat them. I want to remember them. I want to document them. Sometimes I can't remember, uh, let's say, what is the seed of this particular fruit called? And because I've not heard used that word in now 40 years, and I actually sometimes go to recipes, videos of recipes, just to hear those words. Because the words that are used in recipes are the dearest to me, because they are the ones that remind me of my mother's kitchen. They are the ones where my language flourished. And I feel like I want to hear those words. So sometimes, in Sindhi, I will particularly make sure that important words are retained. It is not only vernacularizing English or whatever it is that people call, but it is also documenting a very vanishing world for the Sindhis of India.
Yeah. Thank you. That's wonderful. And you know how much I like hearing about recipes and words and languages. I was also very struck by the two languages that you said were in Etihad. One seemed very familiar. To me, it sounded like Kannada Kadambari. which is like, my lover's gaze is like as deep as the ocean. And that really romantic novel by a woman in our languages. And then it would suddenly shift into this kind of Nehruvian
Yeah,
realism, right?
yeah,
Of like, this is what men should do, and this is what women
yeah,
should do for
yeah,
a new India that is free
yeah.
from its oppressors. Um, and I found it really interesting that you chose to keep that you didn't make it more smooth, uh, or like as if the reader in English would not notice that. Um, One, I wanted to ask you about that choice. Why do you, what does that do when you translate like that? Two, which is a broader question, which I've been thinking about for a while now, especially since Heartlamp came out and it got the accolades that it did. That it became a long, I mean, circular conversation about literary genre, literary style. How do we
Hmm.
read that in translation? Um, Heartlamp and Banu Mushtaq's work comes out of the Bandaya movement, but that completely uh, is removed from context when it's in English and it is published internationally, right? And then it's both sides. It's like this is about a certain kind of savior gaze, or this is you're not understanding what is happening here. And so there's so much that comes up for text from our languages translated to English about merit, about literary merit, and style and genre. So, how do you negotiate something like that when you're translating text like this? What are the choices you make um, in when reception is always so fraught?
Uh, I think I mean, I'll let Krupa speak for, I think I do small text so often. I do small regions, small languages, small text. I did, s- I did set out with grand narratives ever in my life. In fact, sometimes I actually pause and ask myself uh, whether I am using Sindhi or my Sindhiness actually shaped my politics in that manner. That in the so, for instance, what happens with Banu Mushtaq and that particular translation, it gets accepted by pen mentorship. Once it's accepted, it's gone there. Then many other sort of modes open up, and as such, any book can have that potential. But if you begin to think of your translation or the book you're dealing with that kind of grandeur, I'm not trying to undermine or undersell, but I don't start off any project thinking of it in grand terms, which is, I'm not saying that it is not important, but I always think it looks important to me because it is important to me. But I don't actually, I'm too scared of exaggerating the importance and thinking that this has some grand value. And so, in some sense, I think what has basically happened is that I feel like my translations and my work has makes burrows from the sides. It doesn't go hit at the, I mean, it can go hit at the heart of something, but it has been labor of many years of burrowing from the sides. And maybe the hitting is showing on some days now. But I I don't know. So I don't even want to make that comparison, Chandana. I don't know to think about it. It's a be meaningless one for me because that's not the way my mind has worked. I think my mind has worked more in terms of that, okay, what did, this book, how it tells me about that period, what it does about that history. Okay, how does it connect with such and such, and so on. I mean, it is pretty obvious that the men in the Sindhi community didn't bloody read Guli Sadarangani at all. They never talked about her. All the histories have been written by men, and they've never even mentioned her. right? So I think I'm just too busy dealing with small forms of violence to even worry about something much bigger, Chandana, because the small forms of violence are so many, so casual, so multiple, and so everyday that even just understanding that, articulating it, uh, just takes so much out of us.
But I just wanted to say that I quite really enjoyed that sort of. I could obviously notice the slip between the really romantic stuff and then the. But it was also sort of, it spoke to me so much because I can be like that. I can sit and watch K dramas. Like I've watched 50 K dramas, okay, all rom coms. And then all day I'm also just sort of screaming about what is going on in the news. And I'm just like, this is not how this nation should be. So I can sort of, it felt like, yeah, there could be this multiplicity, that somebody else must have also been like that. So this, maybe they also consumed all these love stories or were consumed by this sort of guilty pleasure. And I'm so glad that it didn't become just a guilty pleasure, and it's just like she can be just like this complete person uh, who sort of, contains also this sort of male language inside of her, this sort of Nehruvian tongue, and that's also once in a while. So I kind of quite like that, and that's actually what endeared the text to me. I kind of felt like this was. I said this even when we were doing the other talk, that it really felt like meeting another friend from the past. It really, that's probably one of the reasons also that I quite enjoyed that. Yeah, but not to take away from the seriousness of all the other things, but but yeah, it was also like, if there was more of this romance, I could really have seen an adaptation of this, sort of unfold. And I hope, I don't know, maybe somebody should build on it and write some, write like a sequel, or I don't know, write like a visual sequel. I don't know, Rita, we should write like a screenplay or like a play or
Oh, I
something.
would love to. I have dialogues in my head all the time.
We should do that. I would go like sit in some hill station and sort of
Yeah.
set it there, and yeah.
With a professor of mine, I'm doing Sanskrit recently. So we spent about a year um, reading a Hindu Muslim love ballad from Banaras in the 17th century, 18th century. And when I was reading it hard, these were two texts that together for me were both that seemed so out there and like, but also we're just like, this is another love story.
Yeah.
Um,
Of course.
it is so much of our present moment that gives it that value
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
surprise, of like, this wouldn't be written today or this wouldn't be made today. Um, but it's just also so many tropes that we recognize, we know have been a part of our languages. Uh, the waterfall where you go to meet your lover and your friend, women talking to each other about this. I saw a little bit of Hazaro Khwaishein Aisi, the book, the movie, in how these friends, these young people talk to each other.
Mm.
So I think it's both very familiar, and that like estrangement comes from our political movement and what we are told we shouldn't expect, um, rather than not existing. I also wanted to talk about the ending of the books, I guess, as we come to a close with this conversation as well. Um, Asha is blossoming through this book, right? Like she begins in a very kind of protected environment. And then it's really about her even considering leaving this country or like going out, moves abroad. Um, and in Unmoored, we have our three protagonists in some ways returning, figuring out both the estrangement of coming back home as well as what does it mean to create this new idea of home that might bring these three women together. Um, how do you, with these images in mind, I guess, what do you hope for in for women translators or for stories like this in the future? How do we see ahead, whether it is to think about a language like Sindhi and how we might preserve it, and which isn't a romantic view of everybody must speak Sindhi, but a pragmatic way of translation that Rita you're doing, or thinking about our languages as multilingual Anglophone people. How do we go back to our languages? How do we work through translation, preserve, change, keep? How do you guys? How do you both think we do
I'll just
this?
make a quick intervention and then I want to listen to Rita speak. But throughout the session, I've just been like, Rita, please speak more. But if you haven't realized it yet, I'm like her number one fan. But I'm so happy to be at this.
I would have to disagree. I am.
Don't fight for it. But I just want to say that, there's something really interesting about this entire women translating women thing. The other thing is also that my mother tongue is actually Telugu, and Usha, who wrote this Tamil novella, her mother tongue is actually Kannada. Oh. And yeah, she's been, I think, many generations in Tamil Nadu, or at least a couple of generations. I knew her father also, but then they also spoke fluent Tamil. And so the fact that she moved to the Gulf, and then there was a community of Tamil bloggers who were from the Gulf especially, and then there was a real online fiction movement. It still continues for Tamil. And they have a community, and they sort of connect with each other, encourage each other, and there are like all these prizes that recognize. So Usha has written another novel now, and that has won another prize, and has been just published, called Kavu, and it's sort of something that really interests me. It's a very similar premise to my own novel, and it's set in the 30s, about this girl called Kaveri, who's called Kavu by her family. And Kaveri, of course, because it's a Tamil person writing about like a Kannada family, and very orthodox, Kannada family and stuff. So the fact that she chose to write in Tamil, and the fact that, of course, it's because we grew up in Chennai, she and I both, and our parents sort of privileged Tamil over our mother tongue in terms of the text that they wanted us to learn at school. It was different for my brother, who sort of lived briefly in Tirupati. So my brother actually can read and write Telugu, while I can read and write Tamil. And I can only speak my mother tongue. I can't actually read and write. And I've been trying to learn. I've been actually not very good at it. I've been trying to get those small texts and stuff. So for me, so I am meeting somebody whose mother tongue is not Tamil at that same, almost similar sort of level. I'm meeting them at that level in this Tamil text, and with the same amount of curiosity. And also we both have come to Tamil from an academic, as well as it's not the language we fight with our mothers in, for instance. It's not the language we might even converse with our spouses in for most part of the day. It's not the language we are speaking with our kids in. It's a language that we are speaking either to our friends in, or when we are making a transaction, or or when we're reading literature. And so that is also a very interesting thing for me, the fact that neither of us, we came to Tamil because of academia, because of whatever academics, not academia, but the fact that we can now do this. And I sent the book to another friend who works with Kannada, and I've been trying to convince him to sort of see if he can write this in Kannada and try and bring it to her mother tongue, and then we'll try and see if somebody who knows Telugu can write, and then we'll see what we hear through these various and I think what this Center for Translation and what Rita is doing is actually, I think, sort of it enables all of these possibilities, right? If this book had remained in the original in Tamil, we wouldn't even be having these thoughts, at least, of what would this book sound like in Kannada, for instance, and which I'm very curious to see. Even Kaud, her other book, I'm very curious because it has a lot of Kannada phrases written in Tamil, in the Tamil book. And so for me, that's such an interesting sort of idea. So I like I feel like the possibilities or what I want to take away from this experience is to see how many other languages we can infiltrate like this with our thoughts, and where does it go? What does it sound like? Just sort of as a curiosity, or as a sort of a natural reflection of who we are, multilingual, and as opposed to sort of, I don't know. I think there's also so much, and I'm so glad I actually came to translation through these kinds of projects, as opposed to sort of thinking that, okay, I must submit myself to some higher authority and see if I receive a grant, and then only then I will work on this project. And I'm not at that space, and I'm actually finding it sort of pleasurable to do it like this, to answer your previous question as well. So,
Thank you.
So Krupa had translated Dilip Kumar,
right, yeah,
the writer. Yeah.
yeah.
I had translated one of his stories, which is about a cat in the Agragah.
Yeah. Dilip is also like he's a Gujarati
Yeah.
from Chennai who writes in
Yeah.
Tamil. So
Yeah.
yes, you're right. Correct.
So Subhashri Krishnaswamy had translated Dilip's story into English, and
Wow.
then I translated into Gujarati.
Oh,
So in
wow.
some sense, what you're saying about Usha going back to Kannada,
Yeah.
it was, so I was bringing Dilip back where, where he might have belonged. And I wrote a piece about it in Gujarati actually. And
Oh,
so
wow.
it's not available because I translated into Gujarati and then I wrote about it. So what is interesting is that when you migrate from, let's say, Kannada to Hindi or to Tamil or what have you, that particular migration is a part of the story, even if the story doesn't talk about that migration.
Right.
So for instance, if I retained Muddy, even when I translated into Gujarati, because I wanted that encounter to be available to the Gujarati reader, right? So you've got like a very Vaishnav Gujarati mother-in-law or grandmother saying Muddy in Tamil. And then I thought, well, I want this to be there in Gujarati also. And I provided a footnote because I thought it was important to see, not do away with Dilip's journey,
Right.
but to see what it is when you come back home, that you bring back traces of that migration, right? In that. But going back to your question, Chandana, the one thing that has stayed with me a lot is from the end of Ittihad, one is, of course, that Hamid wants to stay in India, right? And we want that beginning, not that end, but we want that beginning. For Muslims at least. But what also interests me is that this child whom they come up with some complicated name for that child, right? But what is interesting is that the child is also, the child is in a swing at the end, right? And the verse is in Sindhi. So in some sense, the imagination of the nation is in the regional idiom. And therefore, I mean, this is something even Krupa will appreciate it. I think the whole, once again, has this whole dialectic of the region. And are nations to be imagined regionally? Are regions nations? This question interests me a great deal, right? Because I think to make the two separate, we know that is not, and to also think of, let's say, to think of Tamilism as a regional nationalism also does not serve the purpose at all. So what is to actually imagine the nation through the region, right? Is a very interesting question for me. And I think that is what Ittihad ends with, as far as I am concerned, because I'm also very interested in having for young readers, Sindhi readers, a book where they can see that Sindh has meant this too, that these intimacies, maybe not always romantic, but certainly friendships, and most certainly very, very big friendships, and relations and partnerships and work and between Hindus and Muslims was so common in Sindh. And I just want young Sindhi readers who will get to know a small sliver of Sindh through my translations. I want them to know this as well. I'll be dead and gone, but I hope they will see that there were these sides to us, and maybe they will own them up and not only do the Sindhi Kadi and Jhulelal, which irritates me. I know you are a food person, but I have to say, I want a t-shirt that says, don't mention the Sindhi Kadi. I love it. I made the best of it, but it has come to substitute for an entire history. Like sometimes people, like a friend of mine who's known me for 40 years or so, yesterday she said to me, so Rita, are you saying that Sindhi has a script? And, oh, you're saying it's not a Devanagari script. Oh, it's written like Urdu. And I'm thinking in 40 years, you didn't realize that I was writing these books and I was translating and I was writing about it. And you didn't. She said, but I have to tell you something. You know, the other day somebody called me and they gave me Sindhi curry and I said, oh, this I know. Rita has fed me. So, yeah, so I'm hoping that one leaves behind more.
Thank you. I think also, as much as it's an idea of the nation, it's also unmaking of the nation state, right? To bring Sindh forward and Sindhi,
Yeah,
its complexity, is to say we can't think of Sindh between what is today India and what is today Pakistan.
that is true.
You can't, and which brings all of these like redundant, stupid
Yeah.
essentialisms like, oh, this is the Persian-Arabic script, and this is the Devanagari script, and this has to belong to a certain language, and this has to belong to a certain people. And whereas so often any language we could write in another script in the way we write in the Roman script all the time on our text messages. And I think a lot of the translation work, a lot of these two books is also, even with Ittihad's Nehruvian idealism, actually unmaking um, the India that we end up with or have ended up with. And actually breaking that apart and saying we are actually so many more languages and so many more scripts. And even those two languages within a book, which is supposed to be in one language, that kind of tussle with each other. On that note, I think this has been a lovely conversation, and I'm so grateful
Yeah,
to
this
have been
is,
a
it
part.
felt like we met or something, no?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it did.
And hopefully we can as well very soon and continue these conversations. We're so grateful for Ananke Literature Festival to have given us this opportunity, as well as Zubaan and the Ashoka Center for Translation for being the reason we have these books and these conversations that can happen. Thank you very much, and we
Thank you,
will all
Chandana.
hopefully
Thank
see you
you.
soon.
Thank you. You were amazing. Thank you.
Krupa, you and I have to meet, not
I
just meet
know.
online.
I know.
Yeah.
We only meet online. I don't
Yeah.
even remember when we met last. Okay. See
Okay,
you.
I'm going to stop this recording somehow.